Hi, my name is Cameron Cooper. I'm going to be talking about Chapter 2 from the Strength Training and Coordination Motor Learning textbook, An Integrative Approach by Franz Bosch. This chapter is about anatomy and limiting influences on force production. To start out, we'll be talking about muscle levels and ratios. A constant debate in the strength and conditioning world is muscle mass versus muscle speed. Everyone wants to have these big, strong muscles that can generate a lot of force and be able to outpower their opponents and just be stronger in whatever they're trying to achieve with a specific sport. But they also still would like to maintain the speed to be able to be quick and have quick bursts of energy and just be faster than their opponents as well. So a lot of this comes down to strength coaches having to find a balance between being strong enough, but not being too strong to where there's too much muscle on them or too much mass that would slow them down where they would not be as quick. Sometimes you see athletes have to choose. It's going to vary sport to sport, but we'll talk about like a running back maybe in football. Like Leonard Fournette for the Jacksonville Jaguars, who used to play for LSU, he was a big running back. He relied on big power. He was quick, but he mainly would rely on his big strength to body through the defensive line and muscle his way through to gain his yardage. Whereas now he's kind of shifted his game a little bit so that he's still strong, obviously, if playing in the NFL, but he has changed his game to where he can be a little bit quicker and burst through the holes and hit high speed out in the open field. So that's just a difference of like you can see how someone would change their game up by like the size of muscle mass versus speed. But then again, like I said, every sport's gonna be different. It's gonna be finding what works the best for you or what you're really needing in that sport. But if we really want to talk about muscle levels and ratios, we can break this down into um, force length ending muscle fibers or force velocity muscle fibers. When we're talking about muscle fibers, we're talking about all the little pieces that come together to make one big muscle. We actually have to look at these things individually, and that's what a lot of strength coaches will be attacking when they're trying to train their athletes. The book talks about um, force times speed of muscle action equals power. Obviously, we always hear about people wanting to have a lot of power in their sports, in almost every sport. Everyone thinks more power, the better. Well, that is training these two specific things, force length and force velocity muscle fibers. That is actually what a lot of these strength coaches are attempting to attack when they're trying to create that if they are doing it correctly. Before we can break down the force velocity section of this presentation, first we need to talk about muscle fibers. And muscle fibers consist of overlapping actin and myosin. The more muscle fibers that have the actin and myosin overlapping each other, that's going to create in a shorter, more condensed muscle. Whereas the ones that don't have as much actin and myosin crossing over each other, those are going to be the more long and thinner muscles. When these fibers are pulled apart, like the actin and myosin is pulled farther along from one another, kind of like if you had two people pulling a tug of war rope back and forth. That's kind of how the actin and myosin creates action within the muscle. When the actin and myosin is pulled quickly apart from each other, that will create a quick action, as you would expect, but it does not create a lot of force. The type of actions that would create a lot of force with the actin and myosin would be when they are slowly pulled apart. Those are going to create your more strong movements. This means that high force athletic movements are performed relatively slowly in terms of talking about actin and myosin filaments moving apart. Muscles that are long and thick are good for all types of muscle action that needs to take place in the body. You may wonder why all muscles are not built like this then. That is because it would create several complications with the anatomy structure of the body, but also the muscles would weigh too much and would cause the body to be weighed down more than it would need to be for certain muscles that we have that really don't need a strong muscle to perform it, even though that the long, thick muscles could achieve that same action. Now, another type of muscle, though, that is strategically placed in certain areas of the body and has a very specific action is long but thin muscles. Those are the muscles that create the highest speed actions. This could be correlated back to what we were just recently talking about earlier about the actin myosin filaments that overlap each other being more spread out. You would expect to see that more in the long muscles, and as we said, those are the type of muscles that generate quicker movements. Now we move on to pennant muscle structure. So the force velocity and the force lengthening individual muscle fibers were good starting points for how a muscle might work and the structure it's going to go to. But the real thing that is actually going to affect how a muscle works is the overall shape of a muscle. So all the fibers coming together in the shape that it actually makes. That is what is going to determine the specific action that it's going to be best suited to carry out. The book even goes on to say that there can be like certain muscles that like between everyone they're going to have a general shape, but they could vary slightly from person to person, and that could cause a person to perform a certain action better because of the way their muscle has been structured naturally. So you might have one person who has to use very bland terms, a hamstring shaped a certain way, and it causes them to be able to do a certain action really well, but not another action really well. Well, there might be another person, because their hamstrings are slightly shaped differently, they could have the exact opposite effect, and that they're good at one thing but not the other. A pennant muscle, though, cannot shorten rapidly. And that means if it's not able to shorten quickly, as we talked about earlier, then it's not going to be able to create those high, like typical quick movements. The purpose of a pennant structure is to make muscles whose attachment points are often a long way apart suitable for great force production without requiring a great ideal of mass. It is good we have these, or like we said earlier, the body would be very heavy if we had to have dense, thick muscles. It is good that we still can have lighter muscles that are going to generate the high force needed to carry out certain actions. An example of the muscle structures varying, even though there will be certain standards that are followed that are going to have like the typical result that then thing that they are meant to do, there's always going to be exceptions. Like as we were talking about earlier with the ones that are meant for strength, the ones that are meant for speed. As we know, the typical long and thin muscles are going to be used for creating quick speed and quick bursts of energy. But as we said, with the certain exceptions, would be the rectus abdominis and the erector spinae. These are relatively short, like small, compact muscles, and they are meant to do the high burst of energy. The erector spinae and rectus abdominis, while they are long and thin and working like almost like a series of like a chain, that you would think that they would work like a typical long muscle, but because they are not like that, these have to be trained like they were a condensed small one. That's why like you see someone doing a sit-up, it's usually performed in a relatively slower motion rather than a quick high burst motion. It uses a really good example that I like. It likes to compare the diversity of the human muscles to like the population of a zoo. There's a zoo obviously isn't going to be very attractive. It's only got like certain types of animals. Well, the human body is the same way. It's got many different types of muscles, many different variations and different things that do different things, kind of like you expect to see at a zoo. Well, like at a zoo, the book talks about you're not going to feed all the animals the same thing. They're each going to have their own fixed diets. Well, that's how it's comparing the individual muscle fibers and the different muscles. They're all going to have different ways that need to be trained a certain way, or different things that they need to be like quote unquote fed to get the proper max benefit out of each of them. Next, we move in to what limits the muscles or muscle limitations. The first thing we'll briefly talk about is moment arms. Basically, what the book is trying to get across when it's talking about moment arms is that there's certain angles and positions that muscles are going to work best in. They're going to work in multiple angles, but there's certain ones that they are going to perform at their most like prime. That's going to be their peak prime performance. It's going to be at a certain angle. This is going to be based on like these angles are going to be set by the joint angle that is going on. The book used to describe this is a tennis player going to like for a hard hit in tennis. The most optimal angle for all the muscles involved in hitting that is going to be like the arm up at almost like a 90-degree angle and shoulders tilted. So that way way when they go to clear through, that it allows all the muscles to work most effectively. It could work in other scenarios, but it's not going to have as prime effect as it would in that certain position. Elastic properties are also a limitation from muscles. There's certain different properties that allow a muscle to move a certain way, and um, it's not going to be able to move in a way that it's not necessarily programmed to move. This is where the Hill model kind of comes in. The Hill model does not show which structures are located where in the muscle, but only how the muscle behaves during the activation of the muscle, or basically how it's working during the muscle actions. And then we will also talk about opposing forces. Opposing forces can limit muscles in the fact that basically the approach the book was talking about was that if there is a certain load or something being placed on a muscle that it essentially cannot handle, that is going to obviously limit it. That may seem like common sense, but it's basically that is one of the limitations of the muscles. The muscle cannot take on more than it is capable of. Next, we are talking about muscle slack. Muscle slack is basically when the muscle is loose and doesn't have isn't fully erect. The best way to describe this is if you're attach a rope to a car and you're going to try and pull the car, you're not going to pull the rope while it still has slack in it. It's not going to have very much power, and it's not going to allow it to move very well. This is how people like to think of muscles too. The muscle's going to be at more of their prime form when they use the example the rope is taut, so their muscle is more stretched out and fully erect, ready to go. Athletes try to create counter movements so that they can get their body into this position that will allow them to not have this slack as they get ready to perform whatever certain actions they're going to do. This is not necessarily that easy. Like some sports, it might be a little bit easier. Like in baseball, a hitter can load up on that back leg as the pitch is getting ready to come, and that can help get that muscle taut. But in other sports, it can be very hard to have these counter movements. Like in basketball, where stuff's very quick paced, or in volleyball, it can be very tough to really have a counter movement that's going to allow you to get rid of that muscle slack. And it's going to require very precise timing to do so. There is new studies, though, that somewhat counteract that idea. People have found that some of the most elite athletes do not have actual very strong counter movements. Their counter movements are actually the very, very minuscule. So this could be credited to many things because this other research had been proven to thought to be real set in stone for a while. But this new research is showing that maybe they do really good control of their muscle slack, and that their counter movements are so small it doesn't have that big of an impact as we might want to notice. Next, we move into neuromuscular transition. The first two things we're talking about are things that a lot of people have heard of and are going to have a decent idea of what we're talking about. But when there is slow twitch muscles, these are the ones that are for long distances. As you'd expect, if they're meant to go long, they're not going to tire out easily. And then there's the fast twitch muscles. These are going to be the ones that are able to go quickly, and because you're going quickly, as you might expect, you're going to tire out quickly. There's two versions of the fast twitch. There's type 2A, which is they're fast twitch, but it's more for maybe a shorter long distance sprint where you're not gonna be able to get your fastest, but you're gonna go pretty hard. And then there's gonna be the type 2B, which is gonna be for your absolute sprint as hard as you can for an extremely short time, and you're gonna tire out quick, and that's why you're not able to last as long when doing that type of running. The slow twitch muscles, though, are usually going to be the smaller ones, whereas the type 2As are going to be larger, and then type 2Bs are going to be our largest muscles that are getting used to create this high intense fast force. Next, we move into central influences. Here we're going to be talking about knowing your abilities. A lot of people know if they're going to go run and jump from one thing to another, such as this man in the picture jumping from one cliff to another, they're going to be they're going to know if they're going to be able to make it or not. They're not going to do it as much if there's doubt. We also this can play effect in treating injury. People aren't going to be as likely to want to push up when they're treating an injury. They're going to be a little bit more timid because they worry they might hurt it again, even if the body is in perfectly good shape. You'll see a lot of this after surgery. People underestimate their abilities, and part of the PT's job or the strength coach's job is to help break these habits so they can realize what their body is capable of, or know what their body isn't capable of, so they don't get re-hurt at that time. I had a few other topics I would have liked to went over today. I had another slide drawn up that I had prepared to speak about, but due to this limiting me to 15 minutes, I am unfortunately not going to be able to cover the stuff about the circuits of the spinal cord level.